Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to another 2GR FE video, 3.5 liter Toyota and Lexus V6. These engines are generally great engines, but they have one thing that could completely kill them, and you really need to know about it. If your 2GR FE is equipped with an oil cooler, Toyota decided at some point to have a rubber section in that oil cooler line that goes between the cooler and the engine. This rubber piece loves to rupture, and it will drain this engine from oil in a matter of seconds, and it'll blow it up before you even have a chance to pull over, especially if you're driving on the highway. In this video, we have this 2009 Toyota Highlander with said oil cooler hose that is rubber. We're gonna change it to an all-metal line. And this all-metal line comes from Toyota. Let's lift this car up. Let's start taking it apart, and I'll tell you first how to distinguish which one is which and how to replace it and everything in between. Let's get started. So the first thing we're gonna do is remove these covers to expose the oil cooler, and we'll talk about it. So here is the oil cooler line that is rubber. You see the rubber section right here? That is the part that is no good. And with the covers on, if you come around the back, you can actually see it very, very clearly. You see how that rubber section right here? This is the problem. So what we're gonna replace it with is one that is all metal. And the all metal part, I want you to see the part number. This is a special kit part number. You're not gonna find it in the catalog, because I'll tell you a little tip. I'll write that number also on the screen. If you go and ask the dealership for an oil cooler line, it's only gonna be the oil cooler line, and it's gonna be very expensive. And then you have to buy the gaskets as well. This kit, which you're not gonna find in the manual, has everything you need to do this job. It has the gaskets already with it and the updated oil cooler line. And you notice the section where the rubber lines go now is all metal. This will last the life of the car. This is how it should have been from the beginning, and they did it now. Believe it or not, and this is the part where you really gotta look at this part number and get this. This fits all the 2GRs regardless of model. This kit costs less than just the oil cooler line alone without the gaskets. Don't know why, that's just how it is. So let's start with the car. We want to open the way so we can get this guy out. Let's get our AF sensor, O2 sensor disconnected. We'll get this off. There's a 10 mil right here. We're going to push this wire out of the way. Now, we do have 6 nuts and bolts that hold it. 2 nuts and 1 bolt on each line. The thing is, once you get the bolts off and the nuts, you can't just pull the line out. You have to remove the studs. If you're in rusty land, sometimes when you remove this nut, the stud will come with it. And I'll show you if that doesn't happen, how you remove it. There is one tricky one, which is this bottom one. You have to find just the right contraption to get it out. And the best way we've found is, this will depend on the model and how much access you have. You get a mid-length 12 millimeter socket, 1/4 inch, so it's small. And we will go right on it. Just like that. There we go. That came right out. Sometimes it will be extremely difficult to get to it. You have to use some ingenuity, but in majority of the models, this is not too bad. Venza is notably the tighter one and the harder one. On the Venza, this clamp will be in your way, so you have to undo it and turn it. So this part, the flat part, is towards there. But in the Highlander and the RX, they're not too bad. There's that nut. Things will keep dropping. Now let's remove all of them. The one other thing that you have to do, you're gonna keep moving this side to side to give you clearance. You see how this bracket right here is in the way of that stud? You're gonna hold this bracket and push it a little bit to the side. Don't push it too much to break it or stretch this wire. Just push it enough where you have access to the bolt, and then you're all good. Be careful with these bolts when they're rusty, especially that last one. Be gentle. Don't break the bolts loose by hand. Then if you want to use power tools to run them out and run them in, that's fine, because this last one is known to break when you put excessive force on it. And when it breaks, it's gonna break in the oil subpan, and now this turns into a giant project. So we're gonna start loosening our bolts by hand. They're all 12. The bolts and nuts, they're all 12 millimeter. This is, of course, a rusty land car, so all the bolts have significant rust on them. Now that you've gotten all of them loose, you can use power tools to run them out and back in. When you take this off, make sure, you see the dribble? Make sure you have a catch pan or something that's gonna catch all the oil that's gonna fall, because this is gonna make a giant mess. That last one can be tricky to get a power tool on it. We might end up just doing it by hand. See what happened with this one. The nut came out with a stud. That is okay. You can reuse this, or you can just install a bolt. All these studs do is just help you in installation, but if it comes out like this, don't worry. These studs are designed to come out. So now, before you pull this thing out, which it'll give you a hard time to come out, you're gonna want to remove the studs. Not all of them. You already have one that came out. You wanna remove this one and the top one here. Leave the bottom one, and if the outer one didn't come out, you can also leave it. But you gotta remove this one and this one. So we're gonna use an inverted Torx E8 socket. This will grab the tip of the stud. Again, don't use power tools to remove this. Break them loose by hand, and then you can use power tools. There you go. This came out. This other one is a tricky one, because you don't have a lot of access, a lot of room. There's the stud. See how the tip of the stud has that E8 Torx on it? It just goes right into it and grabs it really well. That's the majority, by the way, of Toyota studs. Will have the ones that are designed to come out will have some kind of E-Torx at the tip. Now you can see that the cooler line already fell down. I'm gonna get this out of the way, and let's pull it out. Let's take a look. Here's that cooler line, folks. It's rubber and it's no good. And this is the better one. See, it's exactly the same. It just does not have the rubber section. And this rubber is rock hard. I mean, I want you to see something. We're gonna do a small experiment here. This rubber is rock hard. I'm gonna try to clamp it. There we go. It ripped already. You see that? it ripped right there. So this one is barely moving. If you just put any kind of pressure on it, it just rips right off. That's the problem with these. This is what happens with these. They get so brittle. Gone. Folks, this was a bad idea from Toyota. This should have been the line that went into this car. This is a metal line. It's not going anywhere. Now the gaskets usually come out with it, but you got to make sure that they came out, because these gaskets can get, they're really skinny metal gaskets. And I will show you something very important about this job failing or working. Do you see how when I remove the gaskets, remnants of the gaskets remained? This is the machine surface, so is the surface that they sit on. When you have pieces of the gasket stay there, like if we look here, you can see all this section of the gasket stayed, this black part. And similarly here, you can even see pieces of it still on here. See that piece? You have to remove this, otherwise this will leak a lot faster than the rubber one rupturing. So here's how we're going to clean this. So we're going to clean the surface with a razor blade to remove all of these black spots left by the gaskets. You see there's a bunch of them. You can take our razor blade. You can see that they're already going away. This area right here. You especially want to clean the area around the openings, not so much on the edges. The edges won't make a huge difference. So if you have some left over on the edges, that's fine, but just try your best, take your time, don't rush. This is the kind of job you're going to do once and never do again, so you don't want to do it twice because you did not clean the gasket well. So I'm going to spend some time here, clean all this very well, and then I'll show you the final result. And this part that I'm going to do right now is because I am OCD. I'm going to use some red Scotch-Brite and just go over it. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, but I just sleep better at night when we do this. Now we're going to give it a good clean. There will always be oil dribbling, and that you can't control. From experience, that wouldn't affect the sealing. If you see a little bit of oil dribble as you're installing things, don't worry. You don't have liquid gasket. This gasket will be like right here. You see that? How you have this dribble? This will always be there. You cannot stop it. So just clean it as best as possible. Make sure the surface doesn't have anything on it. And if a little bit of oil dribbles down, that's not an issue. And here is how that final look. Here's the other one. That's how you want it to be. Nice and clean and ready for the new line. We're going to install our gaskets, and the gaskets will be tricky because you don't have the studs. So one of the gaskets does have a stud, at least one of them, which is this one. You're going to put it on the stud and leave it sitting right there. The other one has no stud to sit on. So you're going to have to install it, start a bolt, and then that will hold it. So on our line, just take the caps. This line goes like this. The bigger part is the part facing forward. This is the one that is sideways. Obviously you can install it the other way, but just to give you an orientation. We're going to hold this right here and grab one of the studs that has the nut on it. And kind of just get it started here to hold the gaskets. Put the bottom into the stud, and then This is the kind of job that would be nice if you had 3 hands, but we only have 2, so be patient. This is a little bit of a patience game to get this started, because you don't want to round things off. Now we're going to start this top stud to hold everything together. This side is not even started. Didn't start right. This is going to be really. This is potentially the difficult part. It's in the correct orientation. We're going to install it. It's probably the trickiest part of this job. Once you get things 2 bolts started, you should be good. You got to make sure your gasket is seated properly, not sticking out. And just like that, it is started. Do not tighten any of the bolts until all your studs and bolts are in and started. This one is the trickiest one. When you go back in to start straight. There's no real sequence to tightening these. So it is really difficult to get a torque wrench in here, so good and tight applies here. Don't over tighten them where you break them, don't leave them loose. And you'll know when things are not tight because you'll have a leak. Now the last one, which is, I'm going to switch sockets here. Again, mid-length, 1/4 inch. 12 millimeter does the trick for the bottom with an extension in there. And that's pretty much done with that. We're going to install our O2 sensor connector back. Last but not least, plug it in. Now, here is what needs to happen after you do this, and I want to make sure that you are aware of this. We were working here. Yes, some oil dribbled down, not a big deal, but watch what happens to this oil, how it travels. We have oil all the way down here, and the reason for that is, and this is why you really need to spend time cleaning this, is the oil will come here, come to the edge of the oil pan, and it'll actually run down. You can kind of see it from here, how it's all wet here, and it'll start dribbling down at the very end of the oil pan. This is something it always does. You want to use brake clean, liberal amounts, so you can get all that oil away. But I will give you one warning, something you must never do. Never spray brake clean on your O2 sensor. It will immediately ruin it, if not shortly after. Never, ever spray brake clean on O2 sensors. And here's a tip: if you're cleaning this and it's a mess, take a shop towel and wrap your O2 sensor with it. Then, if some brake clean comes on, it's going to go on the towel and it'll kind of buffer. So here's what we're going to do here. We're going to clean this entire thing, and then we're all done. Before we wrap it up, for those who are not DIYing this job, I'm going to give you some information on how to check this real quick on the car. Let's talk about some very important information that you need to know about this shop and just general information if you're DIY or not. This is a kind of a medium skill DIY job. If you have ramps, you can do this. You don't really need a lift. Makes it a lot easier with a lift, of course. But parts, you might be tempted to go buy aftermarket parts. Do not do that. It just makes absolutely no sense. Toyota made a proper part that is all metal. You're not going to have a problem with it. The second thing is, buy that part number. I'm going to re-emphasize this, because I see people paying 3 times more for the same thing. So buy this part number. And this part number, you can't just ring up your dealership and tell them, oh, I want an oil cooler line, but I want it. No, walk to the dealership parts department and tell them, I want this part number. Some dealerships might tell you, oh, we won't sell you this part number. Go to the next one. They will eventually sell it to you. Doesn't matter. This is not some special part. Toyota just made a kit in a technical service bulletin, and that's the part number for it. And for information, every time you see the number 04004 at the beginning of the part number, this is a special service kit. This is not a standard parts catalog part. The other thing is, before you even start all this, here's a very simple way to know, A, if you have an oil cooler in your car, B, what style you have, because the newer cars came with the all metal line from the factory. So here's what you're going to do. Pull the engine cover. You could do this without pulling it off, but I just like to pull it off to look better. You're going to look right between the dipstick and the alternator. Here's your alternator. You're going to look down, straight down, and it's probably going to be really hard to show on video, but you can actually see the oil cooler. If you see nothing, you don't have an oil cooler. Don't worry about it. If you see an all metal one, you're good. Don't worry about it. If you see the rubber ones, however, you need to replace it, and ASAP, because I have seen so many 2GR engines completely fail because that line ruptures. And before you jump in the comments, there is another line you also might want to address. It is a lesser severity than the oil cooler line, which is the VVTi supply line. This line also has a small rubber section. This line also got updated to an all metal one, and this line lives right here. This is that line. You see, this one does not have the rubber section. This rubber section starts, do you see the curve of this line? The rubber section would be right here. This one does not have it. If you have this line, you might want to update it. But the problem is, Toyota did not update this as a special service part. They updated it in the newer models. So I'm going to do this. That we will leave for another video when we get one to replace. However, here is the part number for that line. This is the line you're going to get. This is the part number you're going to buy if you want to upgrade yours. In the models with power steering, it's going to be difficult. You have to pull the power steering pump out. In the models that do not have power steering, like this one, it is a simple job. We will leave it for another video once we get one to show you, because this one happens to have the all metal line already, so we don't have to worry about it. And folks, lastly, before we wrap up the video, if you are not DIYing this and you're taking this to a shop, 2 hours of labor is about standard for this job. This line is not expensive. This is an inexpensive job. You should not pay a small fortune for it. No, the oil cooler do not have to come off. Some shops have done that. You do not want to remove that oil cooler. There's no need for it. This is not a massive job. On the Venza, it might creep up to 2.5, 3 hours because it is a lot tighter on the Venza. But otherwise, this is not a bad job and something you definitely need to consider, because this little line could really destroy this engine in a matter of seconds. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.